right, folks, and welcome back to this lesson on Affinity Photo. Now, this is going to be an introductory lesson, so if you're already advanced in this and you're already comfortable with it, certainly feel free to skip to the next YouTube video because all we're going to be talking about in this lesson is a short description between what is called a RAW file format and a .jpg type format, or what we're used to as a JPEG. So, the question that I had when I first became a photographer was, what is the difference between a RAW file and what we traditionally think of as a JPEG, right? JPEGs are the images that we usually see on the internet. They're the file format that we're most used to working to and most exposed to earlier in our career. But I'll tell you what, a lot of professionals, and I myself am unfortunately switching over to this mentality, exclusively shoot in RAW. Actually, I have in my camera a setting where it does a RAW file and then also a JPEG file every time I take a picture. Now, let's take a look at kind of how these are different. Right here, let me go ahead and blow this up for you a little bit. I have two images, the exact same file now, and you'll see that the JPEG image right here is kind of really washed out. The colors aren't as rich, they're not as vibrant. And that's because a RAW file format, what is called a RAW file format, has so much more data that you can use in post in order to do so much more manipulation with the color. Now, this comes at an absolute cost. Let me kind of go through and show you this. I'm going to come back to this. Let's go ahead and go into one of my common ones here. Let's take a look at the exact same image here. And let's go ahead and pull up properties. Now, you'll see here, this is a 1.89 megabyte file, just under 2 megs. And the exact same file here, when we right click, is almost 20 megs. So almost 10 times the size of a JPEG. The RAW file format absolutely eats the size on your hard drive like it's its job. So when we do this part, you definitely pay for cost, right? If you've got a lot of files that you're working on, or you're working on a website, that kind of thing, you don't have the bandwidth in order to do a bunch of RAW. And quite frankly, there are very few programs that actually move and compress and translate RAW. Now let's take a look at how that works, because you can't just stick a RAW file up on a website. Let's go ahead and check this out here. When I come up to the same files that I was using before, let's take a look at the RAW file format here. And now this is what is called a .rw2. Now you're going, well, what is that, right? That's not a JPEG. That's not a PNG. What is it? If you go in and you take a look at your camera, I'm going to bring up Wikipedia here. Every camera has its own RAW file name extension. So depending on the type of camera, you may have a .crw, a CR2, or a CR3 if you're running Canon. Kodak has theirs. I'm going to go ahead and I'm running a Panasonic Lumix G7, so I've got a .RAW or a .rw2. So depending on your type of camera, you will have different extensions for RAW files. So right now, without making this lesson too terribly long and too terribly complicated, you shoot RAW when you want a tremendous amount of information that you can take into post and make the colors richer, more vibrant, darker, lighter, because there's just more to work with. When you go through and you take a photo, what happens is it takes all this data, and then if you choose a JPEG compression, it compresses it and tries to flatten it out. That's what gets it to the 2 meg that I had. So a RAW keeps all of that data. Now, unfortunately, there aren't many programs that can go ahead and open them. Now, they give you, again, on Wikipedia, some converters. Thankfully, our friends over here at Affinity Photo actually do RAW. Now, we haven't talked about this before, at least in these tutorials. There is a persona over here called the develop persona, and we just really haven't talked about that. So now let's go ahead and open one of these RAWs. So if I come in here to new, and I click on the new button, well, let's go ahead and open. And let's go ahead and just grab any old RAW file. Now, if you wanted to work with the one that I'm working with, I have included it in the downloads for this lesson. And now it's going to take a second. And you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And eventually it opens. Now look at the richness of this image. And you'll see now that your context toolbar up here is a little different. The raw data contains all the information from the camera. So it contains the size of the picture, which is normal. It contains all of the megapixel data. It contains all of the color data. So you've got a high dynamic range. That's what HDR stands for. And it also has the RAW designation. And then it also recognizes the lens that you were shooting with. As an example, I was working with a prime lens here. I was doing an f1.7 stop with a 25 millimeter lens. So it remembers a lot. Now, how do you work with this? We're going to do a ton of tutorials on working with RAW, and there's certainly no shortage of them on the internet. But if you come over to basic, you can make some really wide changes to your image. You can desaturate, you can saturate, you can change the exposure. Now, there's certainly more to it than this, right? But the piece I want to really call your attention to here is that the changes can be quite striking. You can up the black points, you can change the brightness, and then you can even come in here to the details. You can up the color, drop the color, whatever you want to do. You can also make some lens corrections because depending on the lens that you use, there are certain presets that they have in here that will allow you to correct for some of that. So you can remove the vignette, which is the dark image if it's around the image. So that's kind of how you work with the RAW file. We're going to do tutorials on how to actually edit in RAW. There's one coming up right after this here, so check out the YouTube channel. And when you are done, now this is key, you hit develop. That is the actual term. So you're developing this. Now what it's going to do, it's going to take it, it's going to compress it, and now in Affinity Photo, we're back to the normal tools that we're familiar with. We're back to the panels that we're familiar with, and you'll notice we are out of the develop persona. It's a little more complicated than that when you get into it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to stop it here. And the last thing that I want to show you is there are places just like pexels.com where we get a lot of JPEGs, where you can get high quality RAW files. So if we come down here and we come to the internet, one of my favorite ones is WeSaturate, right? WeSaturate.com. And what this group does, you can come in and you can grab the raw images for these files that have been edited by these people. So big thanks to everybody that participates on WeSaturate. And the cool thing is, because there's only so many photos really to go around, you can find, say, this woman here. If we were to scroll down, you'll see the same picture of the woman edited differently by different people. There's a Brandon Wolfel style edit. All right. And let's go ahead and find one where it's the same woman just with a different edit. There's one right there, right? There's a guy with his coffee cup and his computer. 2 different edits, 2 different people. And then one more here. Let's go ahead and find one more where they're similar. Well, maybe that isn't going to happen today. I'm not going to have you come down here and sit with me while I just go through and play scroll hockey. So you got the idea. We can go to resaturate and you can absolutely grab some good, high quality raw images. Well, there's one actually where she's in kind of a blue and then they changed it up to kind of an orangish, more bright color. So you now know where to go to get raw. You know how to develop raw within Affinity Photo. You know what those extensions mean. You know when to shoot in RAW, and you know kind of how RAW differs from JPEG. Remember, JPEG compresses it. RAW retains all that original data. So when I say that photographers are kind of moving towards some exclusively working in RAW, eventually in your career you get there when you're at the point where subtle color shifts make a huge difference. To begin with, wouldn't even make it a thing. If size is important, wouldn't really worry about it. But if you're interested in working in RAW, Affinity Photo has you covered. Just remember, that's over here in the developer persona. All right, if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe to the channel, we're going to be doing more photo and Affinity Photo tutorials this year. So go ahead, subscribe to the channel, like the video. And if there's anything else you want to see about Affinity Photo or any other photo manipulating program like Photoshop or Lightroom, hit me up in the comments below. All right, on behalf of 7 Seasons Studios, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.